That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, let's go through. Let's talk about some of these buy low wide receivers. And I mean, this is like crunch time right now. I'd imagine that most people have their trade deadlines most likely next week. We probably only have 1 to 2 more weeks of going through and identifying the wide receivers that you want for that fantasy football playoff stretch. One thing that I will say is, I mean, it's fantasy football. This isn't the NFL. There should be no reason to even have a trade deadline until you get to the playoffs. All my leagues that I'm the commissioner of, the trade deadline goes up all the way until the first week of the playoffs, then no more trading. Now, of course, if you ever see someone go through and they decide to trade Christian McCaffrey for Antonio Gibson, you can go, okay, well, that needs to be vetoed. Those people should probably be booted from the league. They can't play next year because obviously they are cheating, but you should allow teams to go through and make deals that can possibly help out both rosters all the way up until the start of the playoffs. But before we get into anything, of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment on the video. Every time you do that, you get entered in to win a free Fantasy Flock Network hat. Let's grab a couple winners for the people who left those comments and likes on the last one. And that's going to be Sir Savage and Brava Abe. Of course, thank you all so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. And also, if you want to support this channel, the number one thing that you can do is go over and sign up for Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. With Underdog Fantasy, they have extremely cool drafts you can get into. I mean, if you want to get into a draft just for week 12, you can do that on Underdog. If you want to draft versus 3 people, 6 people, 12 people, doesn't really matter. They have that available to you on Underdog Fantasy. They also have a ton of cool player props. There are probably not that many player props available right now because I'm recording this on Monday. But Thomas, if you can throw up maybe the few that they have, they'll be adding way more as the week goes on. And if you sign up for Underdog Fantasy and you use promo code FLOCK, they will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Please take advantage of that. You can find the link in the live chat. You can find it in the comment section. You can find it in the description of the video, and it's available in damn near every single state. I mean, it's not available in Nevada. It's now available in Louisiana. That's usually a state we have to throw on this list. It's not available in Nevada, Washington State, Wyoming, and like Hawaii. Something along those lines. And yeah, that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into this. And let's lead it off with DK Metcalf as our first wide receiver here. And with DK Metcalf, I mean, dear God, the Seattle Seahawks are just so frustrating. Now, what makes the Seahawks so frustrating as a passing offense is A, the fact that they don't throw the ball that often. I mean, that's one thing that's frustrating, but we're fine with an offense not wanting to throw the ball if they want to lean on the run. I mean, just go look at the Tennessee Titans over the past 2 seasons when they have Derrick Henry. You can still find a ton of fantasy production with A.J. Brown. Now, what's frustrating about the Seattle Seahawks here is the amount of plays per game that they actually run. This is something that we talked about a lot. This is why when Geno Smith was the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks, I was looking at Metcalf, we were looking at Lockett going, you know what? We want nothing to do with them. Because when they are not running, I mean, even close to the league amount of average plays per game, you need to rely on elite levels of efficiency from that quarterback. And if that efficiency is not there, the fantasy production for the wide receivers won't be either. And Russell Wilson, since coming back from his thumb injury, finger injury, whatever the hell it is, I mean, he has not been the same. He has been a very bad quarterback over the past 2 games. And I'm going to be saying something right now that we said last week. And clearly, I mean, I don't even want to say it was wrong, because one thing I want to point out is the fact that he went up against the Green Bay Packers and he went up against the Arizona Cardinals, both teams that have had very strong defenses so far this season. And with Russell Wilson, we have a decade, and I repeat, a decade-long sample of him being one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the entire NFL that can provide value for his wide receivers. And we have 2 games to look at right now where Russell Wilson's in the tank. I mean, if you're just going through and you're looking at his NFL career, this is a quarterback that, I mean, his adjusted yards per pass attempt up there, 8.7, 9.0, 9.0, 8.5. Like, he is going and he is in the top 10 in adjusted yards per pass attempt essentially every single season, giving you such a high floor at the quarterback position. Now, yes, he has failed, and that is very frustrating. But what's nice to see is you're about to get some better matchups for Russell Wilson going forward. Now, this week in particular, they're going up against the Washington football team. I mean, with Washington, this is a defense that, yeah, you can make the argument, strong run defense, yada, yada, yada. They've been horrible against the pass this season. And at the same time, they lose Chase Young a few weeks ago. I mean, that's not going to be making them any better here. So you get that nice matchup. then I'll admit you have some tough ones. You will have DK Metcalf later on in the season going up against Jalen Ramsey. You'll also have him going up against the Chicago Bears. Obviously, those aren't spots that you're very excited about, but nonetheless, this is a team that, I mean, clearly has to be able to throw the ball a little bit more effectively if they want to have any kind of shot at being a wild card team. Maybe that's not even in the range of outcomes here unless they get close to winning out, but nonetheless, that's possible for the Seattle Seahawks. I think they have to just skew a little bit what they've been doing as of late. And if you're looking at DK Metcalf, this will be the best opportunity to go through and buy low on Metcalf. Whereas the last time we saw DK Metcalf with a productive week of football was back in week 8 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Week 9, he had his bye. And week 10, the Packers, 5.5 points. Against the Cardinals here, he has 7 points. What you love to see, though, is he's getting to 8 targets in each of those performances. And I don't need to be the one to tell you that DK Metcalf, with his size-adjusted athleticism, has a higher ceiling on a week-to-week basis than almost any other wide receiver in the NFL outside of a handful of players. Now, if we're going to be looking at our rest of season rankings over there on Patreon to try to get an idea of where I'm going to be moving DK Metcalf, we are going to be updating these rest of season rankings on Patreon on Tuesday. So right now, it's Monday. I want to wait until we have the Monday night game, until we put the official updates out there on Patreon. But as of now, we had DK Metcalf hovering around the wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8. I think that now we're most likely going to be having to move him probably, I don't even want to say below A.J. Brown. I think he has to stay above A.J. Brown. I think he probably has to stay, I'm not even going to say that out loud. Of course, you can find that on Patreon. Interested to see what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers do today, but what we can possibly look at is if we see that massive spike week from Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, as you're assuming that they're going to have, and I probably shouldn't be speaking on this because the game hasn't happened, and I know a lot of people are going to be looking at me like an idiot, but nonetheless, assuming that we get a spike week from Godwin or Mike Evans, there's a real possibility that we could go through, we could then flip Chris Godwin for DK Metcalf, and we can also maybe get a small upgrade somewhere else in the starting lineup. And now y'all know how many teams I have Chris Godwin on. I love me some Chris Godwin, but at the same time, you will be getting Antonio Brown back, hopefully in a couple weeks. So nonetheless, that is an intriguing play that you could look to make. You could also go and you could look at a wide receiver like Deontay Johnson. If you could flip Deontay Johnson right now for DK Metcalf, I think that would also be fantastic. I just think you have to make a bet on the overall efficiency of this Seattle Seahawks offense, going back to what it's historically been with Russell Wilson. And if that's going to be the case when the targets are this concentrated between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, I mean, you know that Metcalf has in his range of outcomes a 30-point game sometime soon. Now, our next wide receiver is someone that I mistakenly told everybody to play this week. I mean, if you asked me this question in the live stream, I went, oh no, you play Michael Pittman. I mean, with Michael Pittman, we are looking at it saying, yes, this is the toughest matchup he is going to have all season, going up against the Buffalo Bills. We know the Buffalo Bills here, I mean, coming into the week, they had the toughest run defense in the NFL. Now, if you're looking at those stats now, it's laughable how much 5 touchdowns changes things for Jonathan Taylor in the points per game allowed by the Buffalo Bills run defense. Nonetheless, here we were overlooking the fact that it was a really tough matchup just with the improvement overall of this Indianapolis Colts offense. And we were saying, okay, once you get back a fully healthy Quentin Nelson, once you get Carson Wentz fully healthy, clearly the Colts are a completely different team here. Michael Pittman had been extremely productive over the previous month. So we were saying, okay, I think that they're going to be able to overcome a tough matchup. I think the Colts should be able to put points up on the board, and clearly they're driving everything through the passing game through Michael Pittman and Michael Pittman only. Well, sue me, but I was not expecting Jonathan Taylor to come out and get to 5 touchdowns this week. Okay. So we weren't expecting Taylor to get to 5 touchdowns, and we weren't expecting the Indianapolis Colts to boat race the Buffalo Bills here. So yeah, those numbers that you're going to see for Michael Pittman are going to be very skewed. And I will say this, of course, Jonathan Taylor is now the running back 1. If I ever tell you anything else, you need to look at me in the eyes and you need to say, Mason, you have no idea what you're talking about. I am unsubscribing from the channel, and I will never click on one of your videos again. That should be the instant reaction if I do not rank Jonathan Taylor at running back 1. But with that being said, going forward, I mean, I think that with Michael Pittman here, he can be a very viable flex play. If we're just looking at the month previous to what we had with the Buffalo Bills, he was actually a top 10 wide receiver in that month with 20 points against the 49ers, 30 points against the Titans, 17 against the Jets, 12 against the Jags. Now, over the next few weeks, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because he does have some tough matchups. I mean, I would say that once we get to weeks 15, 16, you're probably not going to be that excited about playing Michael Pittman, given the fact that he'll be going up against the New England Patriots. At this point, I think this Patriots defense is one that we need to be avoiding like the plague. He'll also be going up against the Arizona Cardinals. Clearly, we just saw the Cardinals kind of shut down the Seattle Seahawks here. But until then, he has the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know the Indianapolis Colts probably will have to lean a little bit on the pass. And he also has the Houston Texans in week 13. I think Michael Pittman, you can look at him as a easily wide receiver 2 in good matchups. And maybe if it's a tough matchup, you slide him down to your flex, or maybe you look for a different option. But nonetheless, I think Michael Pittman does have that upside to be an intriguing buy low candidate. Looking at my rest of season rankings, I had Michael Pittman coming into the week at wide receiver 17. I don't think we move him anything below that. I think that he honestly probably has to stay in that wide receiver 17, 18, 19 range. And yeah, I think that makes him a buy low candidate. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver, someone that we had as a sell high a few weeks back. Y'all remember on, I believe it was Sunday night when we had, the Dallas Cowboys without Dak Prescott going up and having that game-winning drive against the Minnesota Vikings. Amari Cooper catching that beautiful game-winning touchdown there. And everybody freaking out about Amari Cooper with his 13 targets, with his 8 receptions, 122 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. And yeah, y'all know I love Amari Cooper, but I was the first person to say, okay, primetime game, Amari Cooper blow up. This is not something we can expect every single week going forward. Michael Gallup will get volume when he comes back. CeeDee Lamb will still most likely be the wide receiver 1 in Dallas. So we should probably sell Amari Cooper at this all-time high. Well, since then, Amari, 5 points against the Broncos in a game that the Dallas Cowboys just couldn't get anything going at all. He really didn't even have that great of a game against the Atlanta Falcons back in week 10, with the Falcons going out there and just putting up no fight and allowing the Dallas Cowboys to kind of just have a lot of points going in the direction of Ezekiel Elliott. This past week, he misses on the COVID list. Now, that's one thing that I really want to point out here. It's so safe to go through and buy these players once they miss a week based on them being on the COVID list. It's not like a hamstring injury. It's not like they're on the COVID list. Then, oh, crap. I guess he's going to linger on the COVID list for 2 to 3 weeks. No, that's not happening here. Amari Cooper, what sucks is that I believe he does play on Thursday night this week. So that will be a spot that you most likely need to go through and continue to monitor this to make sure that he is going to be able to make it off the COVID list by then, because that's something we can't say for certain, especially because he got added on at the end of last week. And if it's going to be a short one, we just simply have no idea how that's going to play out. We don't have that much data to be looking at, considering the fact this is the first year we've ever had to deal with these protocols. Now, if we're going to be looking at Amari Cooper beyond that, I still think that he is a wide receiver that has the upside to be a top 5 option every single week. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at that game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Dallas Cowboys and maybe coming away with the wrong assumption of this Dallas offense, where Dallas was number 1 in the NFL in yards per game going into that, and they were number 1 in the NFL in points per game going into that at the same time. And now, of course, Dallas does fail against a Kansas City Chiefs defense that is not that great at all. But at the same time, Dallas was missing out on their left tackle. At the same time, Dallas was missing out on their wide receiver 1 and their wide receiver 2. They were left over with a Michael Gallup coming back from his injury, Cedric Wilson as the top passing game options. They fall behind to the Kansas City Chiefs. Ezekiel Elliott gets injured, so they can't really run the ball there. They should have just leaned on Tony Pollard with how great Tony Pollard looked, but that's a different story. I think a lot of people right now are convincing themselves that the Dallas Cowboys don't have a great offense, which they definitely do when everybody's healthy. So I think Amari Cooper is clearly a buy here in Dallas. And now our next wide receiver will be someone that I did not include in our top 24 wide receiver rankings this past week. He was someone that we definitely wanted to be avoiding because he had a brutal matchup, and I will have a quick humble brag. We didn't include him in our top 24 wide receiver rankings, and he was the wide receiver 31, Devonta Smith. Now with Smith here, this is a wide receiver that I was just trying to avoid because you were looking at it. He had an unsustainable touchdown rate in week 9, and in week 10. He came out and with only 12 targets, he had 3 touchdowns in that 2-week span. That was something that we knew was never going to continue to happen. And also in week 11, you were looking at it and saying, okay, this makes a lot more sense to be a Dallas Goedert game rather than a Devonta Smith game, knowing that Smith was lining up across from Marshawn Lattimore. And with that assignment, you're probably just going to be avoiding whatever wide receiver that you have there. Now with Smith, let me put out a reminder. We went through and you took a look at what you had from the fantasy football playoff schedules for every receiver, every running back this season. And it looks like Smith right now has a top 3 playoff schedule for any wide receiver in fantasy football. And also, we are kind of seeing this with Elijah Moore right now, that these rookie wide receivers, you should expect them to continue to get better as the season progresses. You should expect them to continue to expand their roles in their respective offenses. And it's impressive, to say the least, that Smith is able to come out and he's able to draw 6 targets, and he was more productive against Marshawn Lattimore than what you had with A.J. Brown a few weeks back. Y'all know we love A.J. Brown. I may be bringing up A.J. Brown in a second. But nonetheless, I think with Smith here, this is a wide receiver that just continues to impress, gets double-digit points in a tough matchup here. He still has that fantastic fantasy football playoff upside, and I think now that he has a slight down performance compared to what we had in week 9 and in week 10, he's going to be at a reasonable price point. I'm not telling you to go sell the farm for Devonta Smith. I mean, I actually currently have him ranked as our wide receiver 26 in our rest of season rankings. I think we definitely have to consider moving him up above T. Higgins and Brandon Cooks, so he's probably going to be hovering around the wide receiver 23, wide receiver 24 in our rest of season rankings going forward. But I mean, right now, someone we have him ranked above is DJ Moore. I think there's a real chance that we keep it that way whenever we update those Patreon rankings this next week, and you can easily trade DJ Moore right now for Devonta Smith. Now let's go over to our next wide receiver, and this is going to be another rookie receiver here. Y'all know another player just like Amari Cooper. We had him on a sell high list. We had him on a couple sell high lists earlier this season when he was going out there and dropping 200-yard performances. Jamar Chase. Now, of course, if you were able to sell Jamar Chase for Davante Adams, we were having to tell you to do that because people were losing their minds with Jamar Chase at the beginning part of the season. But this will be back-to-back weeks now where he is making our buy low wide receiver video, and that's because he comes out this past week. Yes, he gets there with the receiving touchdown, but another down week against the Las Vegas Raiders where he only scores a total of 13 fantasy points, bringing his average down so far this season. And the role has not really changed at all in Cincinnati. Now, yes, Tyler Boyd had a fine game this past week, but the issue is with Jamar Chase is he's that deep threat wide receiver. He's that deep threat wide receiver when this offense needs to take shots downfield, and that's something they just simply didn't have to do against the Las Vegas Raiders. This was a dominant team where they were able to get up by multiple touchdowns. You had Joe Mixon running the ball for 30 rushing attempts. So, I mean, you had Jamar Chase, I mean, just really as a player that was a non-factor here. And if we're going to look at weeks 8 through 11, so if we're going to be looking at over the past month in fantasy football, Jamar Chase has dropped like a rock from where he previously was. I mean, if you were looking at his points per game now, he's actually hovering down around wide receiver 29, so a mid wide receiver 3 in fantasy over the past month. If we're remembering what he was through the first 7 weeks this season, I mean, this was, just the elite stretch for Jamar Chase. Instead of being down there as a mid wide receiver 3, he was the wide receiver 4 on a points per game basis, only behind Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, and Cooper Kupp. Now, this is a wide receiver that his role has not changed at all in Cincinnati. The talent profile has not changed either. This is why we were saying to sell him high when he was dropping 159 receiving yards, when he was dropping 200 receiving yards in a game. And that's just the volatility of the wide receiver position. You're going to have those peaks, you're going to have those valleys, but the consistency is with the volume. And if you're looking over the past month, that volume has been there with Jamar Chase, where he has been averaging 9 to 10 targets a game. And that's kind of what you want to see from that alpha wide receiver. So the role hasn't changed at all. Just a couple unlucky games go through by low and Jamar Chase. And our next wide receiver we will include on this list will be Marquis Brown. And with Hollywood Brown, reports are saying right now that, maybe he misses yet another week. He only practiced 1 time last week, which is a little frustrating here. So I would say with Hollywood, maybe proceed with caution. But the thing is, you pull up the matchup that they have. They're going up against the Cleveland Browns. And let me look up the standings that we have in this division right now, because this in-division game is going to be massive for the Baltimore Ravens. Right now, the Ravens lead the division 7-3. You have the Browns at 6-5. So, at this point, every in-division game that you have for the Baltimore Ravens is crucial. I think that they're probably going to do everything they can to get Hollywood Brown back in playing. And a big thing with Hollywood, and I've said this time and time again, and I just want to reiterate because I know his value is lower than what it's been over the past month. And remember, over the past month, I was coming out every single week saying, sell high, sell high, sell high. Now his value has dipped, but that's because we got lucky. That's not because we said anything smart. If anything, I was an idiot to tell you to ever sell high on Hollywood Brown. And I've said this 10 times now, but I want to make sure that we're just getting this on the record. So, I can kind of correct my wrongs here. Y'all know I'm the first person to always admit when I am wrong. And the big thing with Hollywood Brown is I was expecting the passing volume to go down in Baltimore. I was expecting that Rashad Bateman was going to expand his role. I was expecting that when you add a healthy Sammy Watkins, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, Hollywood was going to see more target competition than he's ever had in the NFL. And on top of this, we were expecting that the passing volume for Lamar Jackson, he wasn't going to be able to continue to average 300 passing yards a game. If you were looking historically at that run pass ratio, I was wrong. I mean, the target competition thing is true, but the passing volume will be there for Baltimore. I was stupid to ever say that. Of course, they're going to be throwing the ball aggressively. When you have Hollywood Brown, Rashad Bateman, Sammy Watkins, and Mark Andrews, you're not having to use Willie Snead as your wide receiver one. Of course, you're bumping up the passing rate, especially if instead of handing the ball off to Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins, you're handing it off to just a complete dust ball of running backs in Devonta Freeman and Latavius Murray. So yeah, let me just go out there and double down this take that I think with Hollywood here. Now, there are some tough matchups coming up. I mean, you have the Browns in week 12 as well as in week 14. You have the Steelers in week 13. You have the Packers in week 15 and the Bengals in week 16. So it's going to be a brutal stretch of games for Hollywood Brown. But if you can all of a sudden go through and trade for him at a low wide receiver 2 price tag, a high wide receiver 3 price tag, like if you could go right now and say trade someone, I mean, the perfect example is if you could trade DJ Moore for Hollywood. I think that makes so much sense to just add him on your roster. And one thing that I want to discuss is a wide receiver that's been a buy low candidate for us time and time and time again, especially at the beginning of the season. Disappoints yet again this week. AJ Brown. Now with AJ Brown, please do not panic, but I will say it's about to get worse. The reason for that is I do not think he's going to be 100% healthy and 100% good to go against the Patriots in week 12. Now, maybe he goes through and he tries to play that game, but a big thing with AJ Brown is they have the week 13 bye. So I'm assuming that AJ Brown probably is going to miss week 12 with a couple different injuries to his chest and his ribs. Now, once that happens, he'll also be missing week 13. Hopefully he's 100% healthy coming out of that. Now, even if he does play week 12, I don't know if we can go through and start him because this will be a brutal matchup. He may not be 100%. So I'm not telling you to buy low on AJ Brown right now because I think it's about to get worse. But I know that a lot of people watching this video, based on the previous videos that we had of this kind at the beginning part of the season, have AJ Brown on their rosters. So I owe it to y'all to go through and update my take on AJ Brown. He is still an alpha wide receiver 1 when he's healthy. The issue is, apparently this man can never stay healthy. Of course, I think that the knee injury, a rib injury, they're unrelated. It's honestly just kind of unlucky here for AJ Brown. You're going to get the elite production during the fantasy football playoffs, but over the next 2 weeks, you're going to have a bad matchup against the Patriots and also a bye week. And of course, thank you so much for being a part of the flock and supporting the channel. I really hope that y'all enjoyed this video. Please go down there, drop that like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. It helps us out a ton. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Oh, and go sign up for Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code FLOCK when you sign up for Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. They match you dollar for dollar up to $100 in the deposit. Again, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day, and I hope I see you with the live stream tonight.